For this month, in line with celebrating Easter, we will be going through 1 Corinthians 15, which is a letter written by the Apostle Paul to a church that he had planted in Greece. Now, it has a total of only 16 chapters, but the last chapter really is about tying up loose ends and personal greetings. So, the climax of the letter is really chapter 15, which we're going to look at. And if you read from chapter 1 all the way to chapter 15, you realize that chapter 15 is different because for the first 14 chapters, what Paul was really doing is all very negative. He was correcting a very long list of wrongful behavior in the Corinthian church, right? He was correcting them over their divisiveness, over rampant sexual immorality, Christians hauling one another into the secular law courts, people showing off their spiritual gifts in church, and even abusing the Lord's Supper. So it's interesting, it's very instructive that after working through all those problems for 14 chapters, Paul finally decides to conclude his letter with a long and profound teaching about the resurrection of Jesus Christ. It's as if he's saying that the cause of all those problems is rooted in their failure to understand the resurrection of Jesus Christ and its implications. In other words, they shouldn't be engaging in all those wrongful behavior if only they understood the resurrection, because the resurrection changes everything. Amen? Okay, tell the person next to you that the resurrection changes everything. Okay, that's no exaggeration. No event has, in the history of mankind, has shaped the world more than the resurrection of Jesus Christ 2,000 years ago. It's just that we don't really, put our minds to think about this. But let me just point out a few things that wouldn't be true today if not for that event. First of all, if there had been no resurrection, this would not be the year 2022. Think about that. Now, some of you are thinking, Pastor got it wrong, because 2022 is numbered from the birth of Jesus Christ, not his resurrection. Correct? But if Jesus Christ had not risen from the dead, the truth is, he would have just been like every person who had lived and died, who have been forgotten. He would have been dismissed. Nobody would be numbering anything after his birth. You understand that? Right? And it is only because the whole Western world, right, had convinced the church had convinced the whole Western Europe of the resurrection that that's how we get our dating system today. Secondly, did you know that you might well be at work today, on a Sunday, if it had not been for the resurrection? I was reminded of this some years ago when I met my relative in Harbin in China. She drove a long way to come and meet with us, and then she apologized for not bringing her children. She said it's a Sunday, and Sunday is a school day here in China. So I was quite surprised by that. But how did Sunday become a rest day for almost all of the rest of the world? It came about because the Roman Emperor Constantine converted to the Christian faith in 312 AD. Again, this is not disputed. Historians may disagree whether he was really an authentic Christian or not, but nobody disputes that he converted to Christianity in 1212 AD, and that was a dramatic turnaround because for the previous 200 years, the Roman Empire had officially outlawed and persecuted Christianity severely. But after Constantine became an emperor, he co-issued what is known as the Edict of Milan. Okay, the Edict of Milan legalized Christianity, ordered the property that had been confiscated from Christians to be returned to them, prohibited gladiatorial contests, and set aside Sunday as a day throughout the empire for rest so that Christians could celebrate that day because it was the first day of the week, the day on which Jesus Christ rose from the dead. All this is in historical record. I can go on about how the resurrection has changed the world, but I'm more interested, and I think you are more interested about how the resurrection can change your world, your life. And the thing is this, although we don't really reflect on this very much, the truth is that all of us are looking for something in life or something more in life. We are pursuing something more, and we do this through everything that we do, whether it's through our work, through our relationships, through trying to gain more popularity and power, through accumulating stuff, through pleasurable experiences. We're all doing it. But what is it exactly that we are chasing after? What's the hole in our heart that we are really trying so hard to fill? Well, the resurrection is so powerful because it provides definitive and meaningful answers to those questions. It will change your life. This series is relevant to you, whether you're a Christian or not a Christian, or whether you are maybe not even sure whether you're a Christian or not. 1 Corinthians 15 applies to you. Okay? And so let's get started. It begins with the following introduction in the first 2 verses. The Apostle Paul wrote, "Now, brothers and sisters, I want to remind you of the gospel I preached to you, which you received and on which you have taken your stand. By this gospel, you are saved if you hold firmly to the word I preached to you. Otherwise, you have believed in vain." So for those of you who are believers, what this is telling you is that you are saved provided you hold fast to the doctrine of the resurrection. Okay, I know that it says gospel, not resurrection. But when you read the rest of the chapter, you will know. If you've read it, if you've done devotions, you will know Paul is focusing on that particular aspect of the gospel, that Jesus rose from the dead. And if you are not yet a believer, hey, this is a good point to start exploring Christianity from, okay? Because nothing is more central to Christianity than the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The most common objection, I've been doing this for a long time, right? And I hear all kinds of objections. I hear the same objection from both Christians and non-Christians. The most common objection that people express about believing God or following Jesus is, but I can't feel Him. I can't feel Him. I can't feel God. A closely related one to that is, I just don't have enough faith. I just don't have enough faith to believe. And I think that this is the most common objection because most people the way they go about trying to look for God, connect with God, the way they go about it is to look within themselves, to sense whether they have a mystical feeling called faith, or whether they have a sense of being close to God, a sensation of being close to God. Now, first thing I want to say is, I don't discount such subjective feelings. This is actually, it's a fact, this is how most Christians do their faith. This is how most Christians conclude that God exists and Jesus is alive. That subjective feeling of being close to God. So it is a valid way. I think it's a perfectly valid way of trying to find God and connect with God. The only issue with that approach is that it does not provide objective certainty. Right? You can never be really sure of what you believe. What's going to happen when that feeling you don't feel it, when the feeling goes away? Does God still really exist? Or what if you're going through a really rough patch in your life, you cry to God, no answers, then is He still there? Is He real? And what if your children, many of you here, children, they reach teenage years, or maybe even younger, and they come to you and say, I read on the internet that Christianity is superstitious, it's unscientific, it is just old-fashioned, there's no rational basis for it. What are you going to tell them? God is real because I feel Him? Not a very adequate answer, right? Or how about all the other religions in the world? Don't their followers feel just as convinced, just as inspired by what they believe? How do you answer all that? Well, the resurrection. The resurrection is Christianity's answer to such questions. It provides us with an objective basis to believe in Christianity. Christianity is therefore not blind faith, not a blind leap into the unknown. It is faith based on credible evidence. So that whether you feel it or whether you don't feel it, you can be sure that it is true. Okay, so let's get into it. Today, I want to share with you 3 reasons why we can be confident of the resurrection. Because this is the central plank of Christianity. Okay, if the resurrection happened, we have very good basis to believe that Jesus is God, and you ought to worship Him, no other, and everything He says is true. If the resurrection did not happen, it's all a big joke. Even Apostle Paul said in this chapter, it's all a big joke. We can all go home now. Okay? We are all fooled, and we are the most pitiful of all people, Christians. Okay? That's why it's so important for us to be able to say with confidence that the resurrection happened. How can we be confident? Number 1, we can be confident because this is extensively corroborated. It's extensively corroborated. How do you know whether something really happened? Or more importantly, how do you verify whether someone's account of an event is true or accurate? How do you know? Answer, you look for evidence. You look for supporting evidence. Evidence, or you look for evidence that contradicts it or supports it. Now, always remember the first assignment I was given as a trainee, a lawyer trainee. In those days, we call them pupils, right? The first real assignment had to do with this lady who was making a claim against a motorist. And she said that, she made a report, a police report, and she said that she had stepped down from the bus, and then she walked to the back of the bus, and she tried to cross the road. And the motorist in his car came along and hit her, and she suffered serious injuries. So I thought, hey, this is a pretty open and shut case, right? I mean, what is there to fight? But we represented the insurer, right? And the insurer decided to make an offer of compensation to settle the matter out of court, say that, okay, both sides contributed to the accident, so we make an offer, and if you accept this offer, then we'll hopefully settle this matter. But the lady didn't want to accept the offer. So my partner told me, look, there's this police report. You go and interview the police officer, the investigating officer. Make an appointment. So I make an appointment, and I went to the police station and interviewed the police officer. And I must say that it was so difficult. Because every question I asked her, you know what's the answer? Sorry, I can't tell you that. That is part of police investigations. What about this? Sorry, I can't tell you that. That is part of police investigations. It's like, well, I'm banging my head against the wall. I come here for what? So finally, I asked her, I said, okay, so are there any other witnesses to this incident, the accident? And she said, yes, there's a witness who came forward. And I was so happy. I said, so what did the witness say? And she guess her answer? Sorry, I can't tell you that. That's part of police investigations. So I was sitting there, I was like, wow, But okay, she saw that I was a noob, I was a rookie, and I was just stumped and frustrated. So she took pity on me. And so she said, if you write in formally, we will give you the details of the witness. Wow, okay, finally. So I wrote in, they gave me the details, contacted the witness, got to come, give a statement, and you know what the witness said? She said, no. What I saw was this lady, she came down from the bus. She did not walk to the back of the bus. In fact, she went to the front of the bus and she crossed the road in front of the bus. Now, that makes a difference, doesn't it? I mean, from common sense perspective, if you're a motorist, okay, if somebody crosses behind the bus, you can see her easily. But if somebody crosses in front of the bus, you will not see her until the last minute, just when she steps out, right, from behind the bus. So we wrote to the plaintiff's lawyers and said, look, we have got a witness who gave this statement, and they immediately came back and accepted the offer, because they know that she lied and the case wasn't so great after all. And, when that happened, I felt so happy. First time in my life, I felt that I make a difference to the world. That I did something that made a real difference in the real world. How did it happen? All that I did was to find an eyewitness. And what she said changed everything. Eyewitness testimony is so powerful. In fact, it is so powerful that whether an accused person hangs or walks may well come down to the person's story, the eyewitness's story, whether it corroborates or challenges the accused person's account. Okay, it is that powerful. It can make the difference between life and death, the way we see things. And that's why the evidence for the resurrection is so compelling, because Here we have powerful eyewitness evidence. Paul goes on to say in verse 3, "For what I received, I pass on to you as of first importance." Okay, so meaning that, look, this is it. This is the most important thing about Christianity. That Christ died for our sins according to the Scriptures, that He was buried, that He was raised on the third day according to the Scriptures, that He appeared to Cephas, that's another name for the Apostle Peter, and then to the 12 apostles. After that, He appeared to more than 500 of the brothers and sisters at the same time, most of whom are still living, though some have fallen asleep. Meaning, oh, guys, you don't believe me? Okay, there's this list of witnesses. You can go and check them out. They're still alive. Then He appeared to James, again, very significant. This James is the one that we've studied for 3 months already, right? He's brother of Jesus. And, if your brother who has grown up with you and lived with you believe that you are the Son of God, I think, no, you can take his word for it. But only because he wasn't a believer in Jesus' lifetime on earth, but only because of this. Then to all the apostles, and last of all, He appeared to me also as the one abnormally born. Now, it's important to understand when the Apostle Paul wrote this, he was not just coming up, just compiling a list of witnesses himself. That's why he began with some very technical words. What I received, I also pass on to you. Okay, in those days, that's how people write when they want to convey something that's been established, a creed. That this is something that the early church had already established from its outset. The church had compiled a formal list of witnesses who had seen Jesus Christ well and alive after He was publicly executed on a Roman cross. Now, experts agree that Paul wrote this letter around 55 AD, plus minus a few years. Okay, and what it means is this, listen. This list of witnesses and their testimony had withstood hostile scrutiny for over 2 decades. We all know, okay, again, this is not disputed. Historians agree that from the outset, Christianity was bitterly opposed by the Jews and then the Romans. So you can be sure lots of people would have tried their level best to overturn the evidence, to try and destroy Christianity. But they were unsuccessful because the events of the resurrection were simply too well attested. I mean, think about this. I changed the outcome of the case I was working on by locating just one single witness. But the entire church, the early church had over 500 of them. And I assure you, no court of law would ever require such a high level of proof. You can convict someone on the word of one witness. Because the resurrection is so extensively corroborated, even people who weigh evidence for a living have no difficulty accepting it as credible. Dr. Simon Greenleaf was a professor at Harvard Law School, okay, and he wrote 3 volumes on the law of evidence, on legal evidence. 3 authoritative volumes that I read even to this day. He enjoyed mocking his students who were Christians. Until some of them challenged him to apply the rules of evidence to the resurrection. He took up that challenge, and guess what? He was convinced, and he was converted, and he wrote a book on the resurrection, evidence for the resurrection. In it, he said this, he said, the resurrection of Jesus is one of the best established facts of history. Similarly, the Lord Chief Justice of England, Lord Darling, had this to say about the resurrection. He said, no intelligent jury in the world could fail to bring in a verdict that the resurrection story is true. Okay? These guys, they are people who weigh evidence, sieve evidence, and they do so, to decide guilt or innocence, whether people should be condemned or people should be acquitted. Okay, their decisions, the way that they weigh evidence makes a difference to the people's life and liberty. And these guys studied the evidence for the resurrection, and this is their conclusion. Now, I know there's a silly idea that faith and evidence are opposites. That you don't need evidence to exercise faith, and if If you're asking for evidence, then you cannot have faith. Now, those of you who are married know that this is nonsense. You know why I say that? How many of you have had an arranged marriage? Those of you, man. Anyone here arranged marriage? I don't think so, right? You chose somebody, you saw somebody, you knew somebody, and maybe for many of you it was, wow, love at first sight. But do you jump into the marriage immediately? Do you just say, okay, let's go to the registry and get ourselves registered? Do you do that? I doubt it, lah. But I think what most of you did, or all of you did actually, was to have a period of courtship, and it lasted a long time. 1 year, 2 years, some of you very slow, 3 years, 4 years. Why? Why do you do that? You know why I did that? Put it in very unromantic terms. You were gathering evidence. Really, that's what it was about. You were gathering evidence, right? You're not quite sure, so you wanted to gather enough evidence to make an informed decision. Okay, and sometimes people do that. They try to gather evidence, and the evidence is negative, so okay, no, forget it. But you gather enough evidence. No, there's no certainty. Marriage is not a money-back guarantee kind of thing. There's no certainty, but at some point you say, I have had enough evidence because I have first-hand, credible evidence to believe that this will work and we will live happily ever after. Actually, it's the same with Christianity. You're not asked to take the plunge blindly, but on the basis of evidence. And it is highly corroborated evidence at that, evidence for the resurrection. You have good evidence, so that is really not the issue. Now, I think many people do ask, but where is the evidence found? Mainly, it is found in the Bible. And that's where many people run into a problem, because they think, look, the Bible, well, how can you trust the Bible? Okay, it isn't just book of myths and things written by people who wanted to fabricate something. How do you know that? Okay, that brings us, good question, brings us to the second point. We can have confidence in the resurrection because it is historically credible. Okay, point number 2, it is historically credible. Now, one of the most popular objections against Christianity today is that the Bible is not a historically reliable document. You heard that one? I'm sure you have, because this is all over internet, right? And your children have read that too, I'm sure. Okay, and the main argument for that claim is that, okay, there are two main arguments, but let me just deal with one today. Okay, the main argument for the claim is that the Bible was written so long, like nearly 2,000 years ago. How can we trust something that was written so long ago? How do we know that this dramatic stuff written in the Bible were not just fabricated by the original writers? Or how do we know they were not, added to, embellished, distorted along the way as it was transmitted to earth down through time? It's a valid question. How do we address this issue? Well, like every complex issue, there are really 2 ways to go about it. The first way is you can try and go and figure it out for yourself. Go and read all the original documents that we have, and then understand the culture and the language and all that. Okay, try and figure it out for yourself. Or secondly, you can consult and trust the experts. And I'll be honest with you, the truth is it's not so easy to do it yourself. But that's true of most things in modern life. Recently there's a lot of buzz, right? A lot of talk about, wow, IT workers are paid so much. Okay, and all the young people say, wow, I want to go into the IT industry. Last week, my wife's colleague told her that her son had just graduated from school and he was a new job and he was offered a starting salary of $10,000. Just imagine that. And he was very unhappy. You know why? Because he claims that his classmate had a starting pay of $20,000. Okay, this is just bizarre to us, right? Why are starting salaries for IT workers going through the roof into the stratosphere? Answer is that everything in the world is going digital fast. And though we all enjoy the technology, we rely heavily on the people with the technical and specialized know-how to make all these things work. But there's a serious shortage of such people for now, maybe for the next few years, maybe for the next decade, I don't know. But, well, we need them. And for the rest of us, without the technical know-how, it's not so simple, right? It's not just something you can just go and Google, watch a few YouTube movies, read a few articles, and then figure out for yourself how to get that technology up and keep it running. Anyway, my point is that most of us, to be honest, simply don't have the inclination, the time, the training, or the aptitude to do the hard work of investigating the historical reliability of the Bible. And I assure you, you're not going to be able to figure out just by Googling, reading a few articles, watching a few YouTube movies, and especially articles written all over, there's lots of them, right, on the internet by people with an axe to grind, biased people. So, what can we do? Well, what we need to do is to rely on the experts, the professional historians who specialize, okay? That's how they make a living. They specialize in investigating the biblical documents. And let me just state the case very simply, because contrary to what you may read on the internet, the majority of historians, both Christian historians, non-Christian historians, anti-Christian historians, the majority of them agree that the Bible provides a credible historical record for the following facts. 4 facts. Number 1, Jesus died by crucifixion on a Roman cross, right? He was killed on a Roman cross, and he was buried, meaning he was definitely dead. Number 2, on the 3rd day, his tomb was found empty by a bunch of women. Very interesting, right? Number 3, a significant number of people saw him after he was buried. Okay, and just now we read the list of those people. Number 4, his disciples were radically changed at around the same time. Okay, and went out and started behaving and living their lives very differently. Now, it's important to emphasize and to understand that historians don't approach the Bible as scripture, meaning they don't treat it as some kind of supernatural, inspired writing that come from God. They simply treat it like any other ancient historical record and apply the same test to the New Testament records as to any other ancient writings. And what you find, again, this is not disputed, what you find when you apply the standard tests for historicity or historical reliability, the New Testament, actually the Bible, gets better marks by far than any other ancient record. These 4 facts are accepted as historically true by the vast majority of scholars and even by skeptical scholars. For example, there's this guy, German. His name is Gerd Luthmann. He is an outspoken atheistic historian. You can go and Google him and read on Wikipedia. Okay, he does not believe in Christianity. And he says it may be taken as historically certain that Peter and the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. Okay, they experienced it. He acknowledged that historically the record is reliable. Another guy, an agnostic scholar named Ed Parrish Sanders, writes that Jesus' followers and later Paul had resurrection experiences, meaning they believed they saw the risen Christ, is in my judgment a fact. It's not speculation. It's not a myth. What the reality was that gave rise to the experiences, I do not know. Okay? He's saying that I do not know what conclusion to draw, what caused them, okay, what really happened, but it is not disputed that these guys had these experiences. Okay, so that's point number 3, right? The 3rd fact. Now, if you want a scholarly and yet readable book for lay people on the historicity of the resurrection, okay, because some books are too simple, some are just too cheap. Okay, so this one I recommend to you. It is called The Case of the Resurrection. Actually, The Case of the Resurrection for Jesus Christ, written by 2 scholars, Gary Habermas and Michael Lyconer. These guys, they researched more than 2,200 written works spanning 35 years by Christian as well as non-Christian experts and on the subject, and they found the same conclusion, that the majority of experts believe that the Bible provides a historically credible record of the above facts that I've stated. So my point is simply this, guys, okay? Whatever you may read on the internet, people will tell you, okay, this is what the experts tell us. The key facts surrounding the resurrection are essentially not in dispute. because most historians consider the record in the Bible to be credible, okay, by the test that apply to all historical records. Now, what is disputed is the best explanation to account for those facts, which leads us to the third point. We can be confident of the resurrection because it is logically consistent. Because it is logically consistent, or another way to put it, it provides the best explanation for the facts that we have listed. And one of the most famous law cases in Singapore is called the Sunny Ang murders, the Sunny Ang murder trial. None of us is old enough to be alive at the time, but in 1963, okay, maybe some of us, sorry. In 1963, he brought a woman companion diving near the Sisters Island. The problem was it was a one-way journey for her. She went down, but never come up and was never found again. And he was charged for her murder. At the trial, okay, the following evidence was produced to establish these facts. Number one, the guy was a bankrupt, but he had bought $400,000 worth of insurance for that lady. And then he also recently brought her to a lawyer to execute a will, and guess who was the beneficiary in the will? Not himself, he was bankrupt, right? His mother. He got her to put his mother down as the person who received everything if she dies. And very interesting, just the day before the diving incident, one of those insurance policies actually expired. You know what he did? He went to the insurer, he extended the policy for just 5 days. 5 days, really. Okay? And then he went diving and he didn't go down with her. He claimed that because his oxygen tank had a leak. But subsequent investigations showed that the tanks were perfectly fine. And he didn't show any remorse after she didn't come back. And the only thing that was found was a flipper, fin, we call it more correct, a fin. And, okay, we showed that it had been cut in 2 places by a sharp instrument. But I think the most telling of it all was in less than 24 hours after the incident, he went to the insurers and made an insurance claim. Stupid, right? Well, the point about this whole story is that nobody saw him kill her, and her body was never found. Now, if you're one of the 7 people at the jury trial of Sunny Ang, okay, in those days they still had jury trials, would you have voted to convict him for murder? Okay, let's do a test. How many of you voted to convict him for murder? You know, that's why Lee Kuan Yew abolished jury trials. Because you guys are not objective. Yeah. Okay, anyway, all 7 members of the jury voted to convict him for murder. Why? Okay? Because that is the explanation that best fits all the facts. Okay? So Sunny Ang was convicted and hanged purely on circumstantial evidence. Rightly so, because sometimes the facts, even though they're not direct observation, the facts that we do know, taken altogether holistically, can only point to one logical conclusion. And actually, that's how conclusions are drawn in all the important areas of life. That's how most conclusions are drawn in life. Not because you observe the event directly, but because it's the most logically consistent explanation from what you do know. In fact, that's how scientists confirm theories like the Big Bang and evolution, not because they've observed either one directly, but because those theories provide the best natural explanation for the evidence. They are the most logically consistent conclusions. Now let's go back to the 4 facts, take a look at them, and ask, these 4 facts that most historians agree on, and ask, what's the best conclusion? What's the best conclusion to draw from these 4 facts? Many people, of course, have tried to propose all kinds of theories to explain them, to explain away the resurrection. Okay, so some people have said, okay, Jesus didn't really die, he only fainted. So after that, somehow he was revived, okay, and managed to roll the stone aside and come out of the tomb. Okay, some people have said that, well, Jesus died and was buried, but that was not the tomb he was buried in. Okay, so the women went to the wrong tomb. He's still lying in the grave somewhere. Some people say that the disciples stole the body and claim that Jesus rose from the dead. And then others say that, no, the Jews stole the body. And, well, there's even a school that says that, well, those 500 people who saw Jesus at the same time, they were having a mass hallucination. Well, I can understand why over time, all these objections have fallen out of fashion, fallen by the wayside. And honestly, you don't hear very much about all these alternative theories anymore because they simply lack the explanatory power compared to the resurrection. In fact, let's just focus on the last fact. The disciples were radically changed. Point 4, the disciples were radically changed. And again, the historians do not dispute this. Jesus' disciples had not expected his crucifixion, let alone a resurrection. Understand that? They were all Jews, and Jews believe in the resurrection, but only at the end of time. Everybody who's righteous will be resurrected. Okay, that's what they believe. But they had expected Jesus to lead an uprising against the Roman authorities using his miraculous powers and his great popularity with the crowds. And they were so excited, right? That was going to happen. Just imagine their dismay, the shattering anticlimax when he was arrested, didn't resist, when he was framed, and not acquitted, when he was tortured and crucified and put into a grave. Their hopes were dashed. And not only that, they all scattered like cockroaches when you turn on the light. They went into hiding. Good reason. Okay, for fear that the authorities will come after them next and do the same thing to them. Okay, not disputed. So how could it be that a short time later, those very same guys were standing up publicly in Jerusalem, in the very same city in which Jesus was executed and crucified and buried, and they were boldly proclaiming that Jesus is Lord and God. Remember, why was Jesus executed? Because that's what he claimed, to be God. And now these guys had gone in hiding and they came out and they started saying the same thing. Yes, Jesus is Lord and God. Why would they do that? And how in the world would they get thousands of Jews to believe them? And there's something really significant that people often miss. Jews treat the Sabbath as sacred. That's the 6th day of the week, Saturday. Okay, so they always set aside the Sabbath every week. But these Jews became converted, and instead of Sabbath, now they treat Sunday as the day to remember the Lord, as the day of celebration. Sabbath keeping is so important to these guys, it's just difficult to explain how sacred it was to them. But overnight, thousands of them abandoned that practice and started worshiping this Jesus on a Sunday, just like we are doing now. Why would they do that? And why the disciples, why did they persist in their testimony when they were persecuted, even to the point of being put to death, and they just stood their ground and refused to change their testimony? The only logically consistent explanation for all that was that they must have seen the risen Christ just as they testified. Yes, people tell lies. But people tell lies to get something out of it, right? To get some benefit, avoid some problem. All these guys, if this is a lie, the resurrection is a lie, all these guys got were persecution and death. It'd be crazy, right, to go to their deaths for the sake of perpetrating what they know was a lie. There'll be nothing in it for them. Why would they want to do it? But if they had seen the risen Christ, it would make perfect sense. Because it means that Jesus was God, he had power even over death. So dying is no longer a deterrent. The resurrection. Okay, I've summarized it, I've gone through it very quickly, but really, from a logical point of view, the resurrection is the most convincing explanation for all those facts which historians do not dispute. And of course, as I say, some of these historians, they refuse to come to that conclusion. And there are various reasons why people don't want to come to the most logical conclusion. Okay, I won't go into that today. The point, okay, is that that's the explanation that best fits the facts. And that's also why, after citing all this long list of witnesses, the Apostle Paul pointed to himself. He points to himself in verses 8 to 11. He says, "And last of all, he appeared to me also as the one abnormally born, for I am the least of the apostles and do not even deserve to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. But by the grace of God, I am what I am, and his grace to me was not without effect. No, I worked harder than all of them, yet not I, but the grace of God that was with me. Whether then it is I or they, this is what we preach, and this is what you believed." Why did he say he was one abnormally born? You see, Paul was not one of the original disciples of Jesus Christ, right? In fact, he was the opposite. He was a notoriously vicious and zealous persecutor of the church, getting Christians in prison and even approving of their deaths. But everybody knew the truth. That's why Paul could write like this. Everybody knew the amazing transformation that he underwent. Overnight, he went from being a persecutor to being a preacher of Jesus Christ. He converted large numbers of people and planted churches far and wide, putting up with severe persecution and hardship in order to do so. And Paul is saying, just look at my life. Look at the change that I went through. There will have been no rational explanation for this radical transformation apart from the reality that I've had a personal encounter with the risen Christ. It's the best explanation that best fits the facts. And in fact, if you think about it, if not for Paul, who became the missionary to non-Jews, people like us, we may not even be here today, right? This was the guy that God used to preach the gospel far and wide, plant churches everywhere. And the survival and the rapid spread of the church, despite severe opposition, cannot be explained any other way. How do you account for the fact that thousands, literally thousands of people took on the very real possibility of imprisonment, of persecution, having their property confiscated, and even being tortured and put to death by becoming Christians? And many of them, that happened to many of them. It is a known fact in those days, this dangerous business, becoming a Christian. Why would thousands and thousands, Christianity was basically unstoppable. Why? Except that the testimony of the apostles about the resurrection must have been so credible. It must have been the best explanation for the evidence. Why is the resurrection so important? I mean, if you think about religions in general, what really matters in all the other religions is the teachings, right? What is the content of the teachings is the most important thing in every other religion. Only in Christianity do we insist that the founder of the religion came back from the dead. Why is it that everybody must seriously consider this? Well, remember, earlier I said science has come up with the most logical, natural explanation for the existence of the universe and the world as we see it today. That is, theories of the Big Bang and of evolution. Now I can tell you that if it had not been the resurrection, if not for the evidence of the resurrection, I personally would settle for that as a rational person. Because, if not for the resurrection, then those theories would provide the best, most logical explanation for the world, the universe today. And although it will lead to really depressing implications, if that's true, I will accept that because you've got to follow the evidence. That would be the best explanation, right? I'll go into some of those implications in the weeks to come. But the resurrection proves something more, something that science can never hope to verify, no matter how advanced it gets. Science can never tell whether there's anything beyond the natural universe because that cannot be investigated by the scientific method. It's not that we don't have enough knowledge yet. That is the limitation of the scientific method. It cannot answer that question. And those questions, does God exist? Is there life or something after death? Is there such a thing as objective right and wrong? Does life have any intrinsic purpose? Science cannot answer those questions. It's not a question of not being advanced enough. Okay, it is out of the realm of science. And that's why the resurrection is so important. Jesus claimed that he was God, who had taken a human body to come to earth. He crossed from the supernatural into the natural. He breached the divide. But how can we believe, how can anyone believe such an extravagant claim? How do we know it's true? It's so bizarre. Well, Jesus offered to prove it by coming back from the dead. Something supernatural, right? We have credible evidence that he did exactly that. And that's powerful. And if it is true, it is the most important thing that ever happened in the history of mankind. Because if the resurrection of Jesus Christ happened, the implications are just profound. It means that it means that the supernatural is not mere superstition. Okay? It's not just something people thought up. Okay? That there is another realm out of the natural realm. It means that God is real. It's not a figment of imagination, and not only that, he wants to connect with us. He's taken the initiative to come to earth at great cost to himself. It means that death is not the end, but the beginning of something new. Okay, it will change everything we know about life, death, health, COVID, and the way that we respond. And it will make a difference to how we live in this life, because it will have serious implications for all of eternity. The resurrection changes everything. So, if you're a believer already, learn more about it so that it will strengthen your faith and transform your life even more. And it ought to. If you're not yet a believer, hey, we invite you to come and consider the evidence and then make an informed decision that will change your life. What is the decision that you need to make? Well, you must decide once and for all that Jesus Christ is God and Lord. There's no other, so you will worship him. You must believe that he came to die in your place as your substitute for the sins that you have committed that puts you under God's judgment. You must make a personal decision to trust in him, for God to forgive your sins and to adopt you as his precious child. Okay, if you're still trying to process all that in your head, it's a lot, right? Don't keep coming back, but don't take too long, because this is the single most life-changing decision you can ever make. I assure you, it is even more life-changing than who you ought to marry. It is that significant.